All right, thank you. We're back for the second roundtable in MSU Comics Forum Virtual 2020 event. Once again, we return to explore some of the conversations happening about comics and around comics at MSU. This roundtable is focused on the Graphic Narratives Network, and I will turn it over to them to introduce themselves and lay the groundwork for what I'm sure to be a dynamic conversation. Take it
Thank you
away.
very much. Good morning. My name is Catherine Liu. On behalf of the Graphic Narratives Network and the co-moderator of this roundtable, Dr. Valentina Denzel, I'd like to thank the organizers of the MSU 2021 Comics Forum, particularly to Dr. Julian Chambliss, for giving us this invaluable opportunity to come together and share our experiences of teaching courses with a special focus on visual languages as a method for teaching and knowledge production. For the next 60 minutes, we'd like to have a conversation around 4 topics. And if you have any questions throughout the session, please put them in the chat box and we'll try to respond to them in the last 10 minutes of this roundtable. This morning, we have 5 speakers, and by way of self-introduction, I like to invite each speaker to first say your name and provide a very brief explanation of the course you teach, including its title, subject matter, target students, as well as how this course is informed by your current research agenda, all for 1 minute. So could I get Valentina started for us?
Thank you, Catherine. So my name is Valentina Denzel. I'm in the French program of MSU, and I'm going to talk about a graduate seminar I taught twice. It's called The Marquis de Sade, from Materials Philosophy to Popular Culture and Feminist Theory. So it's aimed towards graduate students. It is not focused solely on comics and graphic novels, but this is a part of the course. What I wanted to do in this course was to look at materialist philosophy from the 18th century, and specifically the Marquis de Sade, and see how popular culture and especially feminist comics of the second wave have adapted materialist philosophy from Sade. And this is part of my second manuscript that has more or less the same title as the course.
Thank you very much, Valentina. So could we get next speaker? I think it's David.
Hi, I'm David Humphrey. I'm a faculty member of the Japanese Studies program, as well as the Global Studies and Arts and Humanities program. The course I'm going to focus on today is a upper division course that I teach through the Japanese program. I've titled it, let's get my official title, Japanese Popular Culture, Media Histories, Agency, and Gender. As the title suggests, it's looking at popular culture. It's meant to do several things. Is to introduce students to a broader history of Japanese popular culture. They're very familiar with certain things that are coming into the US, but not how it's being created and consumed in Japan. Visually, we're looking at a lot of different types of visual genre, from manga, comic books, graphic novels, to idol culture, what's called the media mix in Japan, the media ecologies that surround anime and manga. And it's broadly dialogues with my own research, which, when I say broadly speaking, is looking at contemporary Japanese media culture. So I can talk more about that as we go on.
Thank you, David. And first, can I ask Sadam to do your self-introduction?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sadam Issa. I am affiliated with the Arabic program at the Linguistics Department at Michigan State University. The course I'm teaching is entitled Visual Representations of the Middle East and the World in Political Cartoons. This course offers a subaltern way to look at the political history of the Middle East and its relationships to the world by analyzing Arabic and international political cartoons. This course gives the students the chance to explore the political and cultural history of the Arab world and its relationship to the world from the 20th century till the present day. In this course, students will examine major themes related to the history of the Arab world, such as colonizations, wars, constructions of Arab nations, and pan-Arab nationalism. The course concludes by looking closely at modern day sensitive issues regarding editorial cartoons, especially the cartoons that publish about the Prophet Muhammad. My target students are undergraduate students who are interested in the history of the Middle East and the politics of the Middle East and its relationships to the world. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Sadam. So I think now it's my turn. Once again, my name is Catherine Liu. I am director of the Japanese Studies program here at MSU. And the course I'd like to focus on today is JPN 491. And this course looks at Japanese children's literature and cultural translation. And I have taught this about 4 times. And this is an elective course for Japanese majors and minors who have completed a 2nd-year Japanese course. And I designed this course to bring in multi-perceptual modalities of learning for our students enrolled in the Japanese Studies program. And in particular, this course focuses on cultural translation that pertains to both visual and literary languages. So by exploring illustrated contemporary Japanese children's literature available as examples of digital storytelling, students can interact with authentic Japanese language materials through which they can also investigate the cultural values and mores that Japanese children themselves are expected to acquire and internalize. So I look forward to talking more about this course. So Lynn, could you get us
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lynn Wolff, and I'm a professor in the German Studies program here at MSU and affiliate faculty member in Jewish Studies here as well. The course I'm going to talk about is a new course that I designed. I've dealt with topics like intermediality and reading images and visual languages in almost all of the courses I teach here at MSU. So, but this was the first time I designed a specifically comics-focused course. It's a 400 level class for advanced undergraduates, mostly juniors and seniors who are minoring in German, or German is one of their multiple majors. We often have heritage speakers, so students who have some form of German background, have grown up with the language or spent significant time abroad. So I was lucky that the proficiency level of this group was very high, and we were able to read multiple comics and graphic novels. And the goal of the course was to really introduce what comics are, what comics is as a genre, not as a genre, as a medium of expression, and to look specifically at the history of comics within a German language cultural context. And then we moved on to focus on contemporary German language comics and graphic novels, and especially ones that grapple with history, identity, and politics in some form. The goal in designing this course was to get the students into special collections and make use of the fantastic resources we have in our International Comic Arts collection here at MSU. But it also ties in with my current research and how visual studies have really moved into the center of my work. And I can talk more about that in our discussion, but one core idea that I was able to work with the students on is the idea that graphic narratives don't just tell a story, but they present us with a scene of engagement, as Johanna Drucker has formed it, that graphic narratives and the medium of comics can really give us an opportunity to have an aesthetic experience with a text, that we can engage with it. It opens a space where we can negotiate questions of self and other, modes of human perception, and historical dimensions of cultural production.
Thank you very much, Lynn. So I just like to begin our conversation by asking everybody one particular question, since our course is all focused on visual languages. So I would be very interested in knowing how each of you begin to introduce the, I guess, unique aspect of visual language so that all of your students can actually use it to analyze or think more deeply about the text that you introduce and interact, throughout your courses. So would anyone like to jump in and get us started? Well, David, I think you're ready to jump in.
Yeah, I was about to say. So this is my third year teaching this course at MSU, and then before I came to MSU, I taught it probably about 4 years across different institutions and different iterations. And kind of a roundabout way thing is, one thing I found immediately when I first started teaching, I was right out of grad school, students, I would have thought the popular culture class would be so much more popular than the literature course, but what I was finding is actually real resistance to, and I think probably other people have this, is resistance to analyzing popular culture and in any form, whereas in the literature course was never getting that resistance, because there's a sense that, and this gets to the point that I think for thinking about the textual versus the visual, there's this real sense that getting at the sort of textual language is that's what you do the interpretation, but they're not as familiar with how to then interpret popular culture. One of those aspects was how to interpret the visual. So one of the things I've tried to do across my teaching, but specifically here, is start with the students' intuitions, because leading with, okay, this is how this scholar has analyzed this, this is how you can do it, this is how it's been done, still kind of gets that pushback. So for example, starting out on the first day, before talking about the syllabus, before talking about the self-introductions, I just throw up a piece of something visual on the overhead projection. A lot of times an advertisement in Japanese that maybe gets to something that we're going to talk about, and just pose them with a question like, how would you analyze this? What do you make out of this? And then they kind of grapple through it. First, they're just like, oh, okay, what does it actually mean? And then try to push them. And usually it's like, I pick one that's really simple, like there's light versus dark, and the dark thing is supposed to be the bad thing and the light thing is supposed to be a good thing. And so then they start thinking about, okay, there's various color codes, and then students says, oh, like look at this this is shown more clearly. And so I'm doing that then through the first couple of weeks. Once in, rather than start heavy with the scholarship, get them to actually be looking at things and then start building up their own language, and then slowly introduce, how other people have done this, or what are some other toolkits that we can look at, and then start kind of putting that into our schema. One thing I talk about later is about, a lot of it's thinking about how gender is represented, and then how those sort of how a text addresses itself, not just representing gender, but addresses itself to certain audiences. And it sometimes, right, usually it works, doesn't always work, but getting sort of organically that toolkit they've built up, then they can start thinking about how to put that into these higher level interpretations and analyses.
Thank you very much. You gave us so much to unpack and relate to. So would other panelists respond to David's approach in terms of similarities or differences?
I recognize a lot of similarities in the courses I teach. I'm constantly putting up images and trying to build in some resistance. David, it's interesting, David, you said that there's some resistance as opposed to the literary. I try to create some resistance in not letting the students jump to an analysis or interpretation, but really trying to slow them down and saying, no, but what do you see? And then building up slowly to connect to their interpretations, and then coming back to the image and saying, well, what in the image leads you to believe that? Or what is it about the depiction of the face that makes you say that this person is skeptical or happy? Or what I wanted to say is that it's a similar process. What I'm trying to do, rather than coming with any theory or any terms, doing it hands-on. And then I would build from that, or offer another dimension of what I try to do in my courses is build in both reception and production activities, and really frame them as such that we're reading texts. I had the students read excerpts from Scott McCloud, or Hillary Shute or Chris Ware, and had them respond to those texts on a more maybe theoretical level. And then I try to also have them do just as many production activities where they have to then create an image or create a mini comic. And some of those activities were inspired by Nick Sousanis, who was here last year at the Comics Forum and gave us all sorts of great ideas of how to do that. But getting what I want to say is that I try to get students towards of understanding of visual language, and then also using visual language through both reception and production, and that they have a critical awareness of what they're doing, that it's kind of two sides of the same coin.
Thank you very much, Lynn. So Sadam, would you like to respond to the ideas that are now on the table in terms of how you approach teaching popular culture? I guess it's the political cartoons in your IH course, because I imagine that you have a large class with IH. So how do you make this readily available to your students to use as an analytical tool?
Thank you, Catherine. This is a very important question, and the answer implies maybe unique aspect, talking about unique aspects of the course, and also implies talking about the challenges, although the challenges that would be a different part of our conversation today. So as I said, that the target audience of this course are undergraduate students who are interested in the history of the Middle East and its relationships to the world, okay? And not only the history, but also politics. So obviously, it's very important for me as a teacher to have common grounds between me and the students in terms of, academic common grounds. So, and since the course is entirely relying on analyzing political cartoons, students have to have some good political background about the events that we'll be talking about, or that the cartoons that we'll be analyzing are talking about. So it's very important for me to lay out the historical backgrounds about the events and the political events that we'll be tackling in the class. Yes, students are coming from James Madison College, for example, and obviously they are specialized and majoring in politics, international relations. So they have, some have such a background, but many people don't. So I make sure in the first 2 weeks that I lay out such a political, historical background about the events that we'll be dealing with. Another thing that I make sure that the students are equipped with is tools of analysis. How are we going to analyze political cartoons? It's very important. Yes, you can see, a cartoon, you can just reflect on it, describe it, but to analyze it from a scientific approach, we have to lay out the theoretical background in which the students can stand on in analyzing, the political cartoons. So I spent also the first 2 weeks really laying out the historical political background, as well as laying out the theoretical approaches that the students can rely on in analyzing political cartoons. For example, we use visual metaphor theory, in analyzing political cartoons. I make sure that students have really a concrete understanding of this theory, and obviously make sure that they apply it correctly in their analysis of the political cartoons. So I might, if you allow me, just to talk about a unique aspect of this course. Can I?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so since we're analyzing political cartoons, as you all know, that political cartoons heavily rely on utilizing cultural symbols. And I have students from different backgrounds. And I found this very interesting even for me, because the students, when they start analyzing their own political cartoons, they obviously analyze cartoons, and the cartoons that they bring from their own cultures utilize different cultural symbols. Was a learning experience for me, and I'm pretty sure for other students. And what's also more interesting to see that different cultural symbols or cartoons, different cartoons from different backgrounds, use different cultural symbols to talk about the same political event. That was quite a learning experience for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Valentina, do you have something to add to current conversation?
Yeah, I really enjoyed hearing about Lynn's and David's approach to this, and I also like the creative part in Lynn's course. With my course, it's very specific, gathered towards Enlightenment materialist philosophy, and in some way, the very gruesome adaptation that Saad made of that, and so I can relate very much with Sadam's method, because before I can expose students to comic adaptations of Saad's works or feminist adaptations of Saad's work in popular culture that have, I mean, given the nature of the course, there's a lot of sexual violence depicted. So and that's part of the challenge I encountered too. I have to give students a philosophical and historical context of the works we will be discussing, because reading that in itself can be shocking, but then it's even more shocking for students to see the visual um, uh, mise en oeuvre of these works. So I have to give them a feminist theoretical background, give them a historical and philosophical background, so that there's not only disgust when they are approaching the texts and the comics, but also an intellectual distance that helps them analyze it. And then, as Sadam said, also the tools are important, that they have ways to describe what they see. That's a sort of a phenomenological approach, where what do they feel when they see those comics once they're ready for the content, and how can they express what they see and the impression that that has upon them, but also then describe with the right tools how that specific picture represents specific parts of Saad's thinking and art. So it was very interesting to hear the different approaches.
Mhm. Thank you very much. So like for myself, I think everybody has already addressed effective way of teaching visual language, but because of the subject matter, children's literature, illustrated children's literature. So my students come with the, I guess, lived experience of having interacted with this particular genre. So in terms of their emotional or intellectual resistance toward the topic, it's not really there. But I try to have them really learn how to pay attention to visual language. And I mean something very specific, as the width of a line, color, shading, and everything. And oftentimes students have this eureka moment when they recognize the significance of empty space within visual language. And I think that having them recognize something they all thought they knew so well, and then recognize it is a lot more to it, is a important I guess lesson that I always try to underscore, and also to find the gap between the narrative, the verbal narrative and the visual narrative, and together they form a larger space for our students to explore. So I kind of go with very hands-on analysis of work, and we always do group analysis of a particular spread together first, so that they know how it can be done, and they can gain some experience as well as confidence in terms of how to approach this new language for those of students who have not really used visual language as part of their learning. Okay, so with that, maybe we can move on to another aspect of our teaching. So would anyone like to speak about how you situate your course in terms of your program's curriculum design, and how this particular course helps your students to gain more in-depth knowledge of the field? I think some of you have already addressed that. So let's see what we can get out of this one. So Lynn, do you have anything to add? I mean, your course is also like 400 level, right? 455. So how does this particular course add to your students' overall learning, students who are part of the program?
First of all, I apologize. My internet went out, so I missed the last 10 minutes. I apologize. That's the world we're in right now. So this course is we have the label 455 is supposed to be some aspect of German culture from the 19th century to the present. So it's fulfilling that part of our curriculum, but with a focus on comics, graphic novels, cartoons, and also image stories, Bildergeschichten, which is Wilhelm Busch is a famous 19th century illustrator. And so to give students that type of historical overview, to show them that text image relationships evolve and change over time, but that there are certain constants over the years, centuries. So the course is trying to fulfill that learning objective. It's also coming back to one of the things that David said, teaching popular culture. It's also aiming at giving students a better understanding of high versus low culture, and also challenging that setup. And that was one thing that came across in discussions, but also really explicitly in the course evaluations, that there wasn't a resistance to doing popular culture or comics, but students felt emboldened, or they felt that they could really justify that this is a really valid and important art form that's very complex. And they became really invested in that idea. And it was part of discussing the history of comics that it came up, but they really held on to that. And, you know, again and again said, we really learned that this isn't just children's literature or easy to understand because there are images. And that was interesting that they really picked up on that and wanted to articulate that and sort of defend what they were doing. May have come from the fact that I spoke to that explicitly at the beginning. I said, you may think it's really irrelevant to discuss comics when we have a global pandemic and social, racial inequalities that are exacerbated by the pandemic. And so this comes back to the original question of, I was able to, in discussing comics and image text relationships with the students, show them the really important skills that they're gaining in working with these kinds of texts. Close reading skills, historical contextualization, informed interpretation and judgment. So these are goals that we have, learning goals for all of our classes, but I felt that comics and graphic narratives really lent themselves to getting at those goals.
Thank you very much. So maybe David can respond, since you both have this kind of similar high-low culture kind of aspect to your courses.
Yeah, so once again, I thought a lot to dialogue with Lynn there in terms of what you were saying with your students. So we'll have to have a discussion in more depth sometime about this, about our various experience. And I like your idea of having them create. We do a project where we also go into special collections. Unfortunately, we're not able to do it this year, but go get special collections, and then they create their own translation. They work on that, how to get a translation into a manga, get it right, work with all the visual constraints. But I like this idea of creating as well. So I'll think about how to incorporate that as well. To get back to I'll get a roundabout way to the original question. The other thing I was thinking about in terms of student response, besides the original resistance, and the comment I always love getting back is you ruined popular culture for me, and yet you in the end I feel like I've got a new way to enjoy it. Like I realized that all the stuff and it's really interesting because there's more and more students, I'll put as aside, who are growing up reading, Japanese or East Asian manga and anime. And so it's actually very familiar to them. That's not something I was working with originally before. It was always considered as this sort of necessary foreign thing. For a lot of students, it's not anymore. So there's more this reaction like, you've taken this thing that was the one fun thing and you broke it apart, and then, but somehow you made me think about it. And that then to get back to the original question of like how this fits in the program, that's part of how I see this fitting into gearing students or imparting students with a really sort of critical tool for their toolkit in terms of how they're going to then use Japanese studies, how they're going to use Japanese. Catherine can commiserate with this. One of the sort of unique things about teaching East Asian languages is that, you know, those of you teaching European language can come and contradict this for me, but my experience having done both as an undergraduate is you can get to the place with undergraduate students, or I was at least able when I was an undergraduate to get to the place with a European language where I could be relatively getting into a novel or getting to reading something textual, whereas most students are not coming in with enough background. Even if they are, they're still not able to get to the point of reading Japanese by their fourth year where they're going to actually read an extensive piece of text in Japanese. So there's traditionally a split in how we teach then, you know, East Asian language Japanese. One is, so you have the language class and then you have the culture classes, and they're really kind of split. I think Catherine and I both agree on one thing we're really intent is how do we bring these back together? Is there a way we can do that even with all these obstacles? And so I see a course such as this is really crucial because you're teaching about all these other sort of skills of cultural analysis. And I like what you said, Lynn, about also making them check their assumptions, because that's also what I'm sort of trying to do too, is not just walk down the street and see an advertisement when you're in Japan, or there's so much visual culture that you can just soak in Japan when you just get on a subway and there's, you know, they've got TV screens and there's advertisements. There's so much to learn there. And how can you get something out of that? How could a student go over and get something out of that rather than just, okay, I'm going to go sit in my language classes and learn how to introduce myself to a business meeting or something like that. So that's how I see this as fitting in, is getting that crucial culture component, bringing it back together with the language and sort of healing that split that's sort of infected or inflected Japanese studies, I think, for a long part of its history in the US.
So if I may jump in, so I just want to respond to David's comment on this high bar that's required for our students to be able to actually interact with main text. And that is one of the reasons why I focus on children's literature, because the language is relatively simple, actually quite simple. And students can still learn just as much in terms of improving their analytical skill when the text itself is manageable, because they can really go more into depth. So I think in this sense, children's literature is a very good place for our students to interact with authentic materials and read the entire work, so that they have a complete sense of the work, and then look at how the visuality and the textuality work together. So now I'm speaking too much, so I'm going to ask Valentina to join in the conversation, and then Sadam afterwards.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, I guess it's the cultural and transmission of cultural knowledge, diversity, and also the language skills is certainly a part of the course I've been teaching. I also try to integrate some kind of digital humanity aspect into the course, and so I, when it was still possible, we went to the special collections and we looked not only at the comics but also at the punk fanzines that are out there. That is another part of the course that we were looking at. So not only comics, but also punk fanzines. And then I had students create metadata for a website I had created. It's called Sadam Radicalism. And so the students, I think, really enjoyed, first of all, to see the huge collection we have at MSU. And most of them had never been at the special collection. So, and I don't know if for David and Lynn, it was the same experience with your students, but I think they really enjoyed it. And then we have also a wonderful person, Randy Scott, who's taking care of us, and Joshua Barton. So I think that was a really nice experience. And then also the hands-on activity to not only create the metadata of these fanzines, and students could choose whatever work they wanted to work with. and then but also create a short summary. What is the work about? What's the main message, and how is this related to our course? So then they could also create something that was a different kind of analysis than writing an exam or giving an expose or something. So and in that way, with the DH component, it added a little bit of a different takeaway for students.
Mhm. Very good. Thank you. And Sadam?
Yes, so as you know that I am in the Arabic program,
Mhm.
and culture is a very important component in any language, including Arabic. Unfortunately, culture as a skill, sorry, is not represented in the current Arab textbooks. Yes, teachers, obviously, teachers of Arabic can, bring their own, outside materials. Uh, but that was one aspect. The other aspect that eventually led me to formulate this course is the fact that many students who are studying Arabic, as I said earlier, coming from James Madison College, who have some good background in politics or studying international relations and so on and so forth. So I was start thinking about, or start thinking of a medium that can combine politics and culture. And I didn't find a better course other than a course in political cartoons and comics. So yes, this course that, as I said, the target audience is undergraduate students. It's not only students who are studying Arabic, although I get some students who are studying Arabic signed up for this course. Uh, I use political cartoons and comics in my teaching classes. I try to integrate them. Why? Because as you know, political cartoons and comics are rich venue for teaching culture, language, and politics, and as well as history and political history and cultural history. So when I teach these, when I integrate these materials into my Arabic classes, I teach colloquial. So Arabic language, the one that we teach is modern standard Arabic, close to the language of the Quran and the language that used to be that the Arabs used to speak before even the coming of the Prophet Muhammad. And there is really a huge controversy about which variety to use, modern standard Arabic, currently in Arabic textbooks, or the colloquial Arabic, or the combination of both. Currently, like the trend is to use the combination of both, because as soon as when they travel to the Arab world, they rarely use modern standard Arabic unless they are in formal settings, delivering a speech or meeting with the king or etc., etc., etc. So they are more eager to learn the colloquial Arabic. I found, comics and political cartoons are as a great sources for students to learn colloquial Arabic, because Arab cartoonists don't use modern standard Arabic in political cartoons, because these cartoons are produced to the public, and the public, the language that they understand most
Mhm.
is the colloquial.
Mhm.
The last part I want to talk about here, which has to deal obviously with what I am interested in research-wise, that Lynn also tapped on, which is the interaction between text and image. This is understudied, at least in the Arabic language, the interaction between language and text. And in this case, obviously, I used, Scott McCloud's 6 Strategies and Ronald Barth's Relay and Anchorage. So I have a recommendation about that aspect, like studying the interaction between language and text, but maybe towards the end of the session.
Mhm. Thank you very much. So I think we have about 10 minutes left before we open up to question and answers. So I thought that maybe we would use the remaining time of our conversation to think beyond this roundtable and see, what kind of potential collaborations we might be able to generate, or if there are other ways for us to continue this kind of conversation, because as we see that visual language is being used as a tool for learning in different programs across different languages. And this is, I think, our first time to get together and actually just kind of share some ideas about the kind of teaching that we do using visual languages. So do you have any thoughts on that? You know, as I was listening to Sadam, I was like, wow, it'd be kind of cool to have political cartoon, not just specific to your study, your specialty or special area, but um, all across, you know, like Japan, Germany, and France, and things like that. And I am just, you know, throwing this out and to see if we can kind of find a way to have a dialogue among different programs through the language of visual culture.
Yes, absolutely. That's really very interesting thing because I added to the title of my course and the word
And
because
the
I
word.
don't want yeah and the word because I don't want to restrict my students to analyzing issues or political issues related to the Middle East
Mm-hmm,
because of the language barrier.
mm-hmm,
Because many students don't know Arabic. So how come they are able to decipher the meanings of the political cartoons without being able to decipher, interpret the linguistic text that many political cartoons may accompany?
mm-hmm,
So why I expanded it. But
mm-hmm.
this wise maybe idea for collaboration, as I mentioned in my last participation or my last comment, is that which I am really interested in, something that hasn't been studied well, the interaction between language and text, and in comics or political cartoons and across languages.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say, do Arab cartoonists obviously maybe they are not aware of that, but maybe it's imposed because of their maybe culture or their linguistic background to use particular strategies
Mm-hmm.
that highlight the interaction between language and text.
Mm-hmm.
And would that be different from German, for example? Would that be different from Japanese and Chinese and so on and so forth? And look at the similarities and differences and maybe say why
Mm-hmm.
we have such differences and why we have such similarities.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. With other panelists have some thoughts on potential collaboration moving forward?
I would be very, having listened to the different presentations, I would be very interested to look at the various syllabi of the courses you teach, and maybe, I don't know, have maybe even on the graphic narrative network something about teaching comics or something, where we could download or upload, I'm sorry, upload some kind of syllabi or course projects that have to do with graphic novels. And especially with the political cartoon, I think that would be really interesting to do something cross-cultural and cross-linguistic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are a lot of links already between France and the Arabic world talking about political cartoons, and I'm thinking of, you know, um, oh, I forgot now, Charlie Hebdo, for example. I mean, that's a tragic example of, but there are several overlaps that I think we could enlarge it for including other. So that could be maybe a next roundtable, political cartoons or something.
Yeah, thank you. David, do you oh, go ahead, Lynn.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that what Sadam and Valentina said, that picking out a particular genre like political cartoons and doing a cross-cultural, cross-language comparison, that could be really enriching to the students for them to realize where are their, like Sadam said, particular strategies used, where are the differences, where are there similarities across culture. And then the other thing I was thinking about when several of you were talking is that you're, Valentina and David, that you're bringing the students into special collections. And I also was really frustrated and sad that we couldn't do that as a group last semester because of the pandemic. But I still had the students go in on their own. I was able to have Ruth Ann Jones do an intro over Zoom. And it was a challenge, but it ended up becoming a real reward. It really slowed me down as an instructor and made me really go step by step of what I'm asking the students to do and why I want them to do it. And it was it's project-based learning, but it's in a sense more structured exploration. And I gave them the parameters of how they were supposed to explore the collection. And like Valentina said, you know, I had them pick out a comic and or a graphic narrative novel and summarize it and present it and speak to both thematic and aesthetic aspects. And I think it sounds like we're all doing something similar in our classes, and we should compare those activities and learn from each other. And that would be definitely a point of collaboration. And especially if we're focusing on one genre and doing it a cross-cultural comparison, doing similar projects like these in our classes that get our students together at the end of the semester or a midpoint in the semester for a mini conference or a roundtable where they can exchange their work and speak to a broader audience. We've done that in German where the 300 level students put on an exhibition where 100 and 200 level students come, and it's really great to see them present to their fellow students and to see the first and second year students get inspired by the more advanced students, and then they talk about that in later classes. So I think there's exchanges that can happen within our programs and then across our programs.
Thank you so much. So David, I'm sorry, we don't have time to get your feedback at the moment because we have about 8 minutes left. So let's open the floor to our audiences and see if they have any questions for us. And if none, then we can continue our conversation, but we'll wrap up around 11:10. So Julian, do we have any questions that we need to respond to?
No, there's nothing in the chat right now.
Oh, okay. Then we can continue with our conversation until 11:10. So David, join us. Sorry, I didn't invite you before. So do you have something to add to Lynn's comment?
Just around the margins, I thought many of the ideas are the ones I was thinking of. It'd be great if we could have students come together and present each other. Also because we have such a rich, you know, diverse group of languages and cultures we're looking at. You know, sometimes I think it sounds like we're also kind of doing different terms, so that might complicate it. So barring a presentation, maybe some sort of a resource where students can, you know, like online, where they can be putting up materials to look at, oh, this is how this is done, and in Arabic, this is how it's done in German and French. The other thing I think would be really interesting and rewarding for the students is looking at really like the details of how visual language is diverging across these different areas. Japan's kind of famous for this because Japanese manga has a very specific visual language that until recently was very students found it very difficult to understand. Interesting, they're becoming more familiar with it as emoji has spread, because that spreads that visual language. Like, what is the little sweat drop supposed to mean on the kid? Does that mean they're like sweaty? And now people understand, oh, that means they're kind of stressed out. These kind of things have a long tradition in Japanese manga. And so it'd be interesting for me, because I'm always just comparing it to, okay, this is how it'd be in the US. I think it'd be great to have a resource that's like, oh, you can look and see how this is done in Arabic, this is how it's done in French, and this is how it's done in German. So it'd be my thought. I see some questions are popping up, so I'll finish up and leave the room for the questions.
Okay, so our first question is, do you see parallels in other components of visual culture and even sound studies, for example, film, gaming, music, to do similar synthesis of language and culture? I think it's just a resounding yes. But do you have any specific ways to respond to this question?
One thing that pops up immediately is the question of perspective. Mm-hmm. And looking at a lot of the work with analyzing comics comes from film studies, and even comics, the creation of comics is also being influenced by from film studies, and students may have more experience in film studies too. And so that's, I don't have a specific example, but I can remember the really enthusiastic and dynamic discussions with students when it came to perspective and how it's shifting from panel to panel, and how you can really talk about that with them, and modes of perception, and where is the story focalized right now, who is experiencing this, and the difference between the experiencing figure and the presentation of that experience. So yeah, definitely there's a great synergy with film studies.
Yeah, especially the critical language that we share between visual culture such as film and narratives, graphic narratives. But I was also thinking about directionality. So I guess it might be also true with Sadam's area, but in Japanese, the directionality is, I mean, it's bi-directional, but you can read from right to left, left to right, top to bottom. And this all needs to be considered when we are analyzing sort of the cultural differences as well. But I have another question here. So have you had any issues of censorship, whether organizationally or individually? How did you deal with it? So we have 4 minutes to answer this question.
I think there's also another question.
Yeah, about website.
Mhm.
Yeah. Do you want to read that Valentina?
Have you thought about a specific website to highlight students' work? Should we start with the question you read, Catherine, and then move on to?
Yes. So any thoughts on censorship issues? I mean, the only thing I can think of in relation to Japanese culture is that there has been, I mean, it is no longer there, but for a long time, you couldn't, like show particular body parts, but then that has then become another artistic idiom to deal with. So that's the only thing I can think of at the moment. So maybe we can try to answer the question Valentina just read.
I mentioned my website, Sadam Radicalism, earlier, where I did try to highlight some students' work. That maybe the Graphic Narratives Network would be another possibility to do so. Maybe Lynn, if you want to.
Isn't there a website also that Julian Chambliss has created through the library?
Right, the Graphic Possibilities Library Guide. I didn't mention that, but that was also part of the course that I designed, was familiarizing students with research methods and research tools, and so that came in really handy with the various bibliographies that we've put up there. But I think there's room for lesson plans, but possibly could be expanded to student work. But also the Graphic Narratives Network site we could feature some student work as well.
And we have another question from Justin. And any graphic narrative assignments and exercises that you expected to go well, but just didn't? So anyone who can address it in 2 minutes. So like, for example, David, what kind of challenges did your students experience when they come and complete your course?
I feel like I'm kind of repeating. It goes back to, I think my earliest failures were the ones I was talking about earlier, when coming out of grad school and thinking, okay, let's show them how it's been done, and that was definitely the ultimate fail, and that not only pushback really, but that's just the wrong way to go about it, because they're not engaging with it on their own terms. So that's really guided a lot of how I've gone about these things. I know there's probably a lot of other fails I've had. It's a good question. I just don't have those. Probably every other assignment that I've done, it's always a tinkering. It's always trying to figure, okay, this didn't work out how expected, and moving on. I'm just kind of grasping right now for a concrete example.
No, that's fine. Thank you. So we have a minute. So Valentina, could you help us wrap up this session, and then we will have to say goodbye.
Yeah, well, thank you first of all to all the participants, to Catherine, who has beautifully moderated the session, to Julian, who allowed us to present our research and teaching. I think what we gathered from this is that we have a lot of things in common, and that the different approaches we might have, it would be great if we could share more of our work, then that's something that could go beyond this roundtable. I really like Lynn's idea of trying to coordinate student presentations where students from different languages could come together. I mean, David already mentioned that it might be difficult because we teach maybe the courses at a different time, but there might be a possibility to coordinate when we have the, you know, the works schedule for the next year. Maybe we could try to find a semester where we would all teach something similar. Maybe also guest lectures would be something that could be a possibility. It could be, you know, not something language neutral. Maybe also something that has to do with a project that I did with Catherine and Miguel, but maybe translating comics would be another, you know, adding translation to our work and having students translate various comics could be another part, and then showcase it to other students from other programs. Yeah, it was a very interesting panel. I don't know if Catherine would like to add something to this or anybody else.
I think our time is up, unfortunately, but I just like to end it by thanking everybody for sharing your it's not Saturday yet, it's Friday morning with us. And thank you again to Julian for giving us this opportunity. So let's continue our conversation. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. I looked at the schedule probably 100 times, but I realized I did not give us a buffer between your session and the lightning round. So I have to create one. That's my fault. Of course, please, if you're interested in this roundtable, visit Graphic Narratives Network online at their website, graphicnarrativenetwork.org. And of course, you can follow up with all our faculty here. You can find them on the web. And as I say, this is one of the ongoing conversations at MSU related to comics and culture, and part of our ongoing engagement in that field. And this was a fascinating example of the dynamic work happening in our language studies area. We are going to transition and open up. As I said at the very beginning, we opted for a somewhat easier format with roundtables and lightning rounds. Well, this is our first lightning round that's coming up, and we're going to take a short, like 2-minute break and get our lightning round presenters up on the stream. But I want to thank again the folks on the Graphic Narratives Network for sharing their work in the classroom and the really fascinating implication that has for understanding of language and culture. So again, for those of you on the screen, thanks so much for those questions. And thank you so much, all of you, for taking the time and providing us great insights on the impact of comics in terms of your work and your teaching. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All righty.
Take care.
Bye.
So do we just exit now?
I think you
Yeah,
kick us
you can
out.
exit.